We are at the 100 Years of Power and Progress in Carthage, North Carolina, and this gentleman to my right is Jim Boardwine, and he is making salt, and he's going to tell us the history of salt making. This is something that our ancestors knew how to do. Salt is essential for our survival because it's one of the chemicals that makes up the body, and without salt, we would you would just be completely your body would be completely out of whack. You have to have salt to live, and so he's going to tell us the history of salt and how to make it.
Okay. Now, like I said, the reason salt was so important, your body has to have it to function properly, and its main use all through history was to preserve meat. You got to remember, it ain't been that long ago we were still living without electricity. Without electricity, you ain't got no refrigerators, you ain't got no freezers, and they sure ain't no Walmart down the corner to run to every time you want something to eat. So back in the old days, when we'd kill a big animal, what you couldn't eat right away, they'd have to salt that meat down to keep it from spoiling. Now, I know most folks is at country ham. That's a fine example. You know, when they kill that animal, they'd cut it up, clean it really good. They'd take that salt and smear it all over the meat, pack it in good, and that salt forms a protective barrier that keeps any bugs or germs from getting into the meat and causing it to spoil. And that way they'd hang that meat up in the smokehouse where critters couldn't get to it, and the meat would last through the winter, and it would last years if need be, so the folks would have some meat to eat and have protein in their diet. And to show you how good salt is at preserving meat, there's a ham in Smithville, Virginia right now that's over 100 years old they say you can still eat. I don't know if I want any or not, but it'd be pretty tough chewing. But it's good to know salt's that good at preserving meat, because there may be a time we have to go back to doing that again. Now, the little town I live near up in Virginia, in the mountains, is called Saltville. And the reason Saltville was so important in history is because of the huge body of salt in the ground under it. Our history starts back during the Ice Age. Back in those days, there was actually saltwater springs running out of the hills, and there was a saltwater lake in the bottom of the valley. That drew the big animals in, like the mammoth and the mastodon. Well, the hunters that followed those animals in there, when they discovered this and realized all this salt was here, they knew this was a very special place. So those natives stayed there, and for thousands of years they produced salt by boiling this water in clay pots and trading with other tribes. And we have Indian relics at home of trade goods that was carried from hundreds of miles away. The natives coming in there to trade for that salt. That's how important it was. Now that went on to the year 1567 when Spanish soldiers came in and destroyed the village and killed, according to their records, they killed over 1,000 natives and burnt 50 of their lodges down. Okay, now the valley laid empty for a long time after that. Hunters have passed through. The first European settlers moved in there about 1750. Now by that time that lake had disappeared. So they didn't realize they were sitting on top of this huge salt deposit. General Campbell of Kings Mountain fame was having salt shipped into our area from Williamsburg, Virginia. Now, Williamsburg, Virginia is a long ways on the other end of the state from us. Even today, by car and good highway, you're talking 8 or 9 hour drive probably. And back in those days, all they had was a wagon and a couple of oxen pulling them. It probably took them 3 weeks to make that trip. But they had to have the salt to live. That was life and death. Now, one of the early settlers was out hunting one day, and he found one of those saltwater springs still running. He got an idea. We can start making salt here for ourselves. We ain't got to pay these high charges to bring it in. Heck, we might sell a little bit and make some money ourselves. So they started producing salt. They would use small kettles like what I'm demonstrating here with and boil some for their own use, and they'd make a little extra to trade on, and it became a huge business. Some of the things that just come from that salt money, like the city of Kingsport, Tennessee. Huge town, big chemical town. It was started because William King was a salt maker in Saltville. He was shipping salt down the Holston River on flatboats to his port, Kingsport. That's how that town got started in 1802. From there, the salt was being shipped on to the frontier to Nashboro, which is now Nashville, down to Ross's Landing, which is Chattanooga, and on to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. The salt was being shipped all over the eastern seaboard. And as time went on, like I say, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. Now, when the Revolutionary War started, of course, no battles took place up around our home, but a lot of our men fought in the battles. And that's the reason my family has been in Saltville so long. We've been there since the 1770s. One of my ancestors was a lieutenant under under Colonel Campbell at the Kings Mountain battle in 1780. He was granted a bunch of land along the river there at home for his wartime services. So we've been in the holler for quite a while there now. After the war was over, they came home. They kept making salt. Like I said, it got to be a big business. Kept getting bigger and bigger. Now, when the war between the states started, after the first several months of the war, we were the only place left in the South still producing salt in any amount. Now, there were salt-making facilities in Louisiana and down along the coast in Florida and places like that. The Yankees shut it down pretty early. So we were what was left, you know. We were supplying salt to all the southern states and all the armies we had in the field. So the Yankees figured if they could stop the salt being made, we couldn't preserve food. If we ain't got good food to feed our soldiers, they can't keep fighting. And if anybody reads your history knows, our poor little boys about starved to death as it was anyway. So they kept trying to attack our town. They finally managed to get into the valley in October of 1864. 6,000 Yankee troops attacked the town. All we had were 1,000 old men and boys of the home guard there to defend it. My great-great-granddaddy, Abe Collins, was 16 years old at that fight. Now, it was a bad fight. Lasted all day long. You know, we fought them all day long. We finally managed to push them out of the valley that night. Well, they came back in December that same year with more troops than Stoneman's cavalry. We were down to 400 or 500 defenders by that time. They captured the town. They tried to burn the buildings that we made salt in. They tried to destroy the big cast iron kettles that we evaporated the salt in. And the wells that we had drilled into the salt body by that time to pull this brine out of the ground, excuse me, they were dropping railroad iron and cannonballs down the wells trying to block it off. So when they left town, they wrote in the reports, we've completely destroyed the salt works, so never make salt there again. Well, we was back in full production in 3 weeks. Now I want y'all to think about something. In the 1860s, your average working man, if he had a good year, he might make $100 or $125 for that year's work. Now $125 a year was considered pretty good money back in them days. In 1864, that 1 year alone, in 1864, that 1 year alone, even though we fought 2 major battles trying to keep them scoundrels out there, we sold $100 million worth of salt that 1 year. That'd be worth billions of dollars today. But like I said, that's how important salt was. After the war was over, they kept producing salt there. Well, in 1900, our scientists discovered by adding electricity to this water and adding other chemicals, other things like pulverized limestone, different things, they could make chemicals out of it. So we had a huge chemical industry there for about 70 years. Now, one of the most important chemicals I think was made there, the Air Force had a plant there in the 50s and 60s. They made something called hydrazine. Now, hydrazine was rocket fuel. The first man on the moon was put there by rocket fuel made in this little bitty town up in the mountains of Virginia. And so when I'm talking to school kids, I tell them how cool is it Neil Armstrong filled up the gas in my hometown when he's taking his trip to the moon. So, you know, we don't think much about salt today because everything you buy in the store's got salt in it. You go to a restaurant, your food's already salted, and the doctor tells you don't add too much salt to your diet. But it ain't been that long ago our folks were living having to raise their own food or go out in the woods and find it. They had to add the salt to it themselves or had to use it to preserve their meat. It was literally life and death without it. So I like to tell folks, next time you go to the store and buy that little round can of salt with a little girl on it, think about how much trouble our ancestors went through to get this basic necessity of life. So.
Now there's a cannonball here that is one of those that the Civil War, the Northern soldiers dropped into that salt well. Is that right?
This one wasn't dropped into one of the salt wells. Now this one was one of the Confederate cannonballs. We had an ammo dump there to help protect the town, and this ball was found a couple of years ago when they were doing some excavating. And originally it was given to the museum. Well, the museum was afraid of it because they didn't know whether it was still armed or not. Even though these balls are 150 years old, they can still blow up. So I went to the town council, said, if you'll give me the cannonball, I'll make it safe so we can display it out here and doing our history. And I disarmed the ball, and here it is today for people to see. That's a 12-pound Confederate cannonball.
And then he has some bone parts of mastodons that was also come out of the salt licks.
Yes, ma'am. These all these fossils here, the teeth and the bones, are mammoth and mastodon, and I've got the backbone of a giant ground sloth. All these were found in Saltville, and we've been finding these type of relics there since 1782.
Would you take the mic and then pick those things up and show them what is what?
Sure. Okay. This biggest piece I have right here, this is the lower leg bone of a mammoth. That bone would probably be 3 or 4 feet long if I had the whole thing. This piece is part of a shoulder blade out of one of the big animals. It would have a huge fan of bone on it if it was complete. Like I say, this is the backbone from the giant ground sloth. That's kind of rare, I just found out actually. This piece is the lower jawbone of a mastodon. That's where it hinged into its skull. This is a mammoth tooth, a woolly mammoth tooth. That's one tooth. This is a baby mammoth tooth. This is a mastodon tooth. That's just another hairy elephant that was running around during the Ice Age. And this is a baby mastodon tooth. Like I say, all this came from Saltville. I'll tell you kind of an interesting story. The mastodon tooth there, that was the first type of fossil they found in Saltville in 1782. Nobody knew what it was. They'd never seen nothing like that before. So General Campbell of Kings Mountain fame, he sent the tooth to his friend Thomas Jefferson. See if he knew what it was. Well, by that time, they had been finding stuff like this up in the Ohio River country since the 1730s and 40s. So they knew by this time it's some kind of prehistoric elephant that was roaming these country at that time. And one thing they don't tell you, when Thomas Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark on their journey of discovery, one of the things he wanted to know if those critters were still running around the plains. Because the Plains Indian tribes had their oral histories, they talked about hunting these animals. He wanted to know if they were still out there. If they found any, they didn't tell us about it. Okay, what I'm going to show you here now, this is the type of kettle our early settlers would have used to make salt for their own use. They get this salty water out of the ground, out of a salt lick, and all you're doing is boiling the water, and as you're boiling the water evaporates, it leaves the salt behind. In fact, this is the same method, if you ever read about Daniel Boone, this is a method he used in Kentucky for the settlers. Like I say, after you've boiled the water long enough, you can come out with your pure salt. Now, it might look a little funky because it's a different color than what we're used to. The weather affects it. The kettle will affect the salt a little bit, the color, and the weather will affect the color. But this is the purest salt you'll ever find. This is what our ancestors used for hundreds of years to survive on. And actually, it's got a very good flavor if you ever want to try a little bit of it. They would dig it out. They would get it out of the kettle, and they would put it out to dry. But like I say, actually, as soon as it come out of the kettle, it was ready for use. They didn't even have to let it dry if they wanted to. We were lucky. Our salt lick there at home was so concentrated, that water is 10 times saltier than ocean water when we pump it out of the ground. We can average about 2.5 pounds of salt per gallon of water. So that's why our town was very lucky in having this highly concentrated brine. Most salt licks, well, Boone wrote he had to boil 800 gallons of water to get 1 bushel of salt out of the blue licks in Kentucky. A bushel of salt weighed about 50 pounds. I can get 50 pounds of salt out of 20 gallons of my water and have some left over probably. So, very concentrated. We was lucky. Okay. Now this salt in the jars that I sell to folks, to health food stores and such, this is basically the same thing you saw me doing in the kettle, but this has been through a little bit more thorough process in a cast iron kettle. This salt is naturally white. A lot of salt you buy in the store today has been bleached. It's been iodized, had different things added to it. This salt here is naturally white. Like I say, the drying process brings out the color of it. And this salt, though, is 99.95% pure. This is just about the purest salt you ever find. In fact, this is all my family's ate for several years now. That's pure. It's just pure salt. That's all it is. Pure salt's good for your body. And from research I've read, it's the stuff they add to it what messes with your blood pressure. Pure salt, like I say, now you can't be eating it like candy naturally, but pure salt apparently does not have that effect on your body that all the added ingredients they put into it does. So, it's like any other research, I guess. Take it or leave it as you want.
Well, we thank you very much for this. This has been very interesting, and we thank you for talking to us.
Well, thank y'all. I've enjoyed it.